Game of Thrones is in its off season, but that doesn't mean we have to stop thinking about it. I'm Terry Schwartz, I'm here with Joshua Yell, and we are big fans of Game of Thrones. And I don't know about you, but I can just never get enough of this show. I'm
right there with you. I sit right next to you at work, and believe me.
we talk a lot of Game of Thrones. So recently, showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss made a comment on the UFC Unfiltered podcast that set a lot of people thinking about Game of Thrones and what can come after Game of Thrones. So I'm going to read a quick quote from this where they said, one of the great things about what George R.R. Martin did with Game of Thrones is that he didn't just build a story, he built a world. There are so many characters and such a rich, detailed history behind it that there are a lot of different ways you could go with it. And what they're talking about is potential spin-offs for Game of Thrones. Now, this is something that's sort of been going around for a while. You know, as recently as April, George R.R. Martin started talking about how he would be okay with a spin-off. He had made this creative deal with HBO where people thought they could make a spin-off. So I figured, let's talk Game of Thrones spin-offs. Why not?
Yeah.
So a lot of the spin-offs that have been talked about, you know, sort of hinge around George R.R. Martin's Dunk and Egg novellas. But I actually think that it would be really cool to do a spin-off of Robert's Rebellion. Have you thought about this idea before, what that could look like?
Well, he also hasn't finished the Dunk and Eggs also.
Yeah, we don't need another series that he hasn't finished that they're adapting for TV right now.
Yeah. No, I feel like that is the war that sort of set the landscape for Game of Thrones as we know it. So it would be sort of like a prequel story. Everyone's sort of young in their prime, and we're seeing all the dramatic twists that we know about, like the fall of the Targaryens, and the rise of Robert and the Baratheons, and how the houses all came to be settled in. So I think that'd be really cool to see. And just watch all that drama unfold and just learn a little bit more about the characters and their backstory. And for all the characters who died really early, we get to spend more time with them.
And I think what's really cool is where we're at in Game of Thrones, the show, is they've actually started casting some of those younger actors too. And we've had a chance to see them. And so, you know, you could take some of those actors, give them beefed up roles, and like you said, sort of fill in the blanks about what we don't know about a point in history that there actually has been a decent amount written about. Like David and Dan, if they were to work on this, which they probably would need a break. There probably would be a different showrunner brought in to do a Game of Thrones spin-off series, but I think that they could really, you know, embellish that material and make it something really rich while also having us be able to hinge upon, you know, knowing about Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon and names we know and characters we like. Like you could have young Catelyn Stark and young Cersei and Jaime and all these other characters, as well as like Rhaegar and Lyanna and Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, and
people we've only kind of heard of or now see them like in the flesh. And you mentioned Catelyn, and I think the core of Game of Thrones to me is like Littlefinger unfolding his plan. And one thing he wants is the Iron Throne. The other thing was always Catelyn Stark. Now he wants Sansa because he can't have her.
Right.
But I'd love to see the beginning of that motivation of his relationship with Catelyn, like the younger Littlefinger.
That young infatuation.
So, yes, I think that would be great. And so that would you could really see the wheels turning and how he sets up what actually happens in Game of Thrones.
So because Game of Thrones has a lot of different characters that we can follow and avenues we can go, we don't just have one spin-off idea. We have 4 in total. So another one that we've been talking about is, you know, Bronn. Bronn as a character is one, like looking back to seasons 1 and 2, there were all those like joke videos and everything like that, like a Tyrion and Bronn buddy comedy and things like that with him as a character. Pretty much everyone you put Jerome Flynn up against, he just acts perfectly. Like he's hilarious. He cuts the characters down. He just can always react well. And I think the writers have actually beefed up his appearances and leaned into that. What do you think about having a series that followed Bronn, sort of like Better Call Saul follows Saul Goodman as a Breaking Bad prequel?
Is this a younger Bronn then?
I think it would have to be.
I could see that of just. Maybe just every episode, he's just with somebody different.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's just a team up episode. You never know who he's gonna like come across next.
Because he was a sellsword. Like he led a very interesting life before he latched on to a rich Lannister, 2 rich Lannisters who keep promising him money and then never seeming to follow through, as he brought up this past season. I think it's an opportunity for a tonally different type of Game of Thrones show, and one that shows a different side of the world. Like Game of Thrones, just in the title, is so focused on you know, showing the politics of it all. So to have sort of a layman character, a sellsword who's lower down on the, you know, the hierarchy of Westeros could be
Yeah.
an interesting opportunity.
I could even see this being like a show that takes place after Game of Thrones, and he's just walking around like visiting all the survivors, and we sort of get to check in with all of them through Bronn.
Do you think anyone's going to be left alive at the end?
It would probably just be Bronn.
Just Bronn,
He's
right?
very lonely because he doesn't have anyone to give crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point because, you know, could a Game of Thrones spinoff take place after the series? Obviously, we don't know how Game of Thrones is going to end, so it's hard to think about that. But another character I thought could be good for a spinoff is Varys. Do you think he would be a character who's interesting to check in maybe after if he survives?
Yeah, before or after, really. He's another one of those characters, you know, I feel like, again, you know, Littlefinger is all his plan we're seeing unfolding, and Varys is right there with him, sort of like the person on the other side of the chessboard to Littlefinger, in my mind at least.
Yes.
So I do feel like it would be really interesting to explore what he's up to if he survives Game of Thrones, because he's just a character we just don't know much about.
Yeah, yeah, and we've heard a little bit about his history. He told Tyrion this story about like the sorcerer who made him a eunuch, but there's a lot of blanks to fill in, and just how did he rise to power in the way he did? He was a slave before the sorcerer, you know, cut his manhood off and then set him into the streets. So what happened to him in all those years that turned him into the character who we now know?
Yeah, we've gotten like little hints of all that stuff, but he's by far one of the most fascinating and mysterious characters of all of Game of Thrones. Not that I want to like demystify that, but I think he's got a really cool story, and he's a very different character who gets by not by like stabbing people with swords, but by like manipulating people and like earning favors and really playing people against each other. So I think that's great, and I want to see more of that.
My last and most pie in the sky spin-off idea, and this is like, I imagine this being on par with like Rome in terms of budget because it would just be so expensive, but the Doom of Valyria, which takes place like 1,000 years before the events of Game of Thrones, has always fascinated me. And the fall of Valyria being basically like the greatest city in the known world up until that time, like the center of all magic and knowledge. There were like dragon lords who lived there. That's where the Targaryens were before they left Essos and went to Westeros. I'm like getting deep into my Game of Thrones lore right now. But there's like an amazing chapter in the World of Ice and Fire book, which is basically like a history book of Game of Thrones, all about it. And I think it would just, you know, again, like the scale would be huge, but I think it would be so interesting to not only see the world at that time, which again would feel very different from Game of Thrones, which is a world getting magic again, sort of reborn into a world of magic, but also could give George R. R. Martin an opportunity to explain what actually happened at the Doom of Valyria. We know those are all capital letters, the Doom of Valyria, but like it's still a big question mark what that actually was.
Yeah.
You've read the books as well. Did that ever captivate you as much as it did
No,
me?
yeah, totally. Like this is the one I was really excited for when we were talking about this, and I feel, you know, like you said, you know, Game of Thrones actually starts and there's no magic, and then when the dragons are born, that sort of brings magic back. And so you're seeing sort of this post-magic world relearn magic. But I want to go back to when magic was commonplace. It was all over the place. It's sort of like Lord of the Rings, craziness, our full fantasy. As much as George R. R. Martin defies all fantasy tropes, I just want to see it when he just embellishes in it. And so I feel like that this would be the perfect time to do that. And yeah, that is a mysterious occurrence, the Doom. We never found out exactly what that was. So what better thing to go back and pick up on and explore than that very tantalizing tidbit? Yeah,
it's a cool opportunity for like a transmedia way of telling George R. R. Martin's sweeping story. Going back to what Dan and David said, is like this whole world is begging to be explored. And you know, as much as George R. R. Martin has amazing writing, I think it would be really cool to, you know, use a spin-off to really shine a light into a different part of the world and like give some answers that he hasn't given on the page. Are there any other spin-offs that you're desperate for? You've heard mine. You've heard all mine. I want to give you a chance if you have one dream.
I was all up on that last one.
Yeah, Doom of Valyria. Doom of Valyria, come on, let's make it so, HBO.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, you could do these, I could see like that, especially that last one, because it is so heavy on like fantastical elements. I could see it being like get some like master animators come in and do like a cartoon or something like that.
Oh no,
some
I want
2D
all
animation.
live action.
No, I could take it. I could see them doing these in different ways and all that. So I don't know, it would be cool.
Those are our dream Game of Thrones spin-offs, but obviously pretty much any character character in this series could warrant their own spin-off. They're all well written enough. So let us know what you guys would love to see of a Game of Thrones spin-off. And for all things Game of Thrones, keep it here at IGN.